The rookie nurse was on night shift when the Alaskan storm shut the world down. Wind howled, windows rattled, Marines joked it was a quiet night. Then the power dipped. The doors downstairs blew apart. Not thieves, not amateurs. Smugglers, armed, organized, moving like they'd done this before. Marines rushed the hallway. Doctors froze. Someone yelled,
"Get the nurse out of here!"
but Ava didn't move. She stepped into a darkened room. A single shot cracked through the storm. One smuggler dropped. Clean. No warning. No panic. Just precision. Another tried to run. Another shot. Silence spread through the hall. That's when the smugglers realized. They hadn't broken into a hospital. They'd walked straight into her kill zone. Before we begin, if you enjoy intense medical military stories like this, take 2 seconds to comment where you're watching from and hit subscribe. Now let me take you to Alaska. The wind never stopped screaming out here. It clawed at the corrugated steel walls of the military hospital like it wanted inside, rattling windows that had already frozen into milky sheets of ice. Snow piled high against the outer doors, burying the lower hinges, turning the building into a bunker by accident rather than design. Fort Glacier Medical Outpost sat 3 hours from the nearest town and farther still from anything resembling backup. The Marines stationed there joked that if something went wrong, help would arrive sometime next week, assuming the weather felt generous. That night, the weather did not. Ava moved down the hallway with a tray of IV fluids balanced against her hip, her steps quiet, measured, light blue scrubs, hair tied back tight, no rank, no visible history. Just another rookie nurse sent to a place nobody requested. She nodded politely as she passed 2 Marines leaning against the wall near triage. "Evening," one of them said, grinning. "Cold enough for you?" She gave a small smile. "Gets colder around 0300. The Marine blinked. "Yeah? How do you—" But she was already walking. No one noticed how she paused at the end of the corridor, not long enough to look suspicious, just long enough to glance at the reinforced window overlooking the frozen runway. No one clocked the way her eyes tracked the snowdrifts, measuring height, distance, visibility. No one noticed her fingers flex once, like she was counting. They saw a nurse. They always did. The hospital was quiet in the way only remote places ever are. Not peaceful, just waiting. Monitors beeped steadily. A generator hummed beneath the floor, steady but strained. Outside, visibility dropped to less than 50 meters as the storm thickened. Inside the command office, the Marine duty officer argued with a radio that refused to cooperate. "Say again, Control, you're breaking up." Static answered. Ava heard it through 2 walls and a closed door. Her hand tightened slightly on the tray. 10 minutes later, the first alarm chirped. Not the loud one, the small one. The kind most people ignored because it usually meant nothing. Motion sensor, perimeter east. A Marine glanced at the screen. "Probably a fox," he muttered. "They get bold in storms." Another sensor tripped, then another. This time, Ava stopped walking. She turned slowly, eyes lifting toward the ceiling, as if listening for something deeper than sound. "Power flicker," a corpsman asked nearby. Right on cue, the lights dimmed for half a second. Not out, just enough to test reactions. Ava set the tray down. Far outside, buried beneath snow and static, something metal scraped against ice. The smugglers had planned it carefully. They'd watched the hospital for weeks, learned the storm cycles, counted patrol rotations. They knew Marines trusted weather the way cities trusted locks. Nobody moved in conditions like this unless they were desperate. Or stupid. They came low, dressed in white over dark gear, faces masked, boots wrapped to muffle sound. Not insurgents, not amateurs. Smugglers who moved weapons and people through frozen corridors no satellite liked to watch. Their intel said the hospital held more than patients that night. They were right. Inside, Marines were still debating whether to call in a routine weather report when the exterior floodlights died completely. Darkness pressed against the windows. Ava exhaled once. Someone shouted from security, "We just lost perimeter cams!" The first gunshot didn't echo. The storm swallowed it whole. A Marine near the door stiffened, brow furrowing. "Did you hear?" The second shot dropped him mid-sentence. He fell hard, helmet clattering against tile, blood spreading too fast to be anything but catastrophic. Chaos exploded. "Contact! Contact!" Marines scrambled for cover, rifles coming up, boots slipping on polished floors. Someone dragged the wounded Marine back behind a gurney, hands shaking, voice breaking as he called for a medic. Ava was already gone. She moved through a maintenance corridor most of the staff didn't even know existed, fingers brushing the wall to orient in near darkness. Her breathing slowed as her world narrowed, not in fear, but focus. This place again, she thought. Different building, same math. Outside, the smugglers advanced, confident now. They'd neutralized the outer watch without resistance. Marines were loud, reactive, predictable. They never saw her. From an upper window partially iced over, Ava lay prone, scrubs replaced by cold weather gear pulled from a hidden locker she'd memorized weeks ago. The rifle came together in practiced silence, each motion economical, muscle memory untouched by time or guilt. She checked wind drift, minimal but erratic, snowfall dense, visibility poor. Good. The lead smuggler stepped into the open, signaling his team forward. Ava adjusted her aim 2 centimeters left. She squeezed. The shot cracked like a branch snapping. The smuggler dropped face first into the snow, lifeless before his brain could process sound. Inside the hospital, Marines froze. "What the hell was that?" someone shouted. Another smuggler fell backward, chest punched inward as if hit by a truck. He never touched the ground alive. Panic rippled through the attackers. They scattered, firing blindly into the storm, rounds chewing uselessly into ice and steel. Inside, a Marine whispered, stunned. "Who's firing back?" No one answered. Ava cycled the bolt. Third target, moving too fast. She waited, not rushed, not emotional. She fired again. 3 shots, 3 down, clean. She didn't count out of pride. She counted because numbers mattered. They always had. Inside the command room, a young Marine stared at the security feed in disbelief. "Sir, I think someone out there is hunting them." The duty officer swallowed. "We don't have a sniper assigned." Ava shifted position, already anticipating the smuggler's next move. They'd changed tactics now. Go inside, force close quarters. They always did. She abandoned the window and disappeared into the stairwell before anyone could even think to look for her. As Marines regrouped, dragging wounded to cover and shouting orders over the storm, a single thought spread through the room, quiet, unsettling, impossible to ignore. Someone here knows exactly what they're doing. And as the smugglers breached the outer door, unaware they were already down 3 men, Ava chambered another round and whispered to herself, calm as ever, "Don't make me do this the hard way." The next shot came from inside the building. The first smuggler through the door never saw it coming. He kicked the emergency entrance open with a boot wrapped in white tape, rifle up, breath fogging inside his mask, expecting panicked nurses and Marines scrambling to find cover. Instead, the lights snapped back on. Not fully, just enough. Ava stood at the end of the corridor, calm as a held breath, rifle already shouldered. He fired first. He missed. She didn't. The shot was deafening indoors, a thunderclap that rattled ceiling panels and sent a shockwave down the hall. The smuggler collapsed backward, rifle skidding across the tile. His partner behind him froze, not from fear, but confusion. This wasn't how the playbook went. Inside the hospital, Marines pushed wounded back behind overturned gurneys and steel carts, weapons trained on doorways. Someone shouted for a medic. Someone else shouted for a count. The storm outside howled louder, as if mocking the sudden order trying to take shape inside. Ava moved, not running, sliding, stepping, vanishing between cover points she'd memorized weeks ago under the excuse of learning the building. She dropped the rifle behind a column, switched to her sidearm without looking, and took a knee. 2 smugglers rushed the corridor together, stacking tight, professional. She waited until the first crossed the red line in her head. 2 shots, 1 breath. Both went down. The Marines stared. "Who the hell is that?" one whispered. Another shook his head. "That's not one of ours." Ava didn't hear them. She was already listening for something else, the change in rhythm. The smugglers had stopped charging. They were thinking now. That was dangerous. Up on the 2nd floor, glass shattered as a flashbang rolled across the nurses' station. The blast was blinding, concussive. A corpsman screamed as he hit the floor, hands over his ears. Ava flinched once, then forced herself forward through the haze. She passed a Marine crouched behind a cart, eyes wide. He looked up at her scrubs, now dusted with soot, and blurted, "Ma'am, you need to get back?" She pressed a finger to her lips. He obeyed without knowing why. Around the corner, two smugglers swept the ward, rifles tracking beds, checking shadows. They were hunting for something specific now. Not supplies, not prisoners. Ava recognized the behavior instantly. They were looking for the shooter. She leaned out, fired once, retreated before the echo finished bouncing. One smuggler went down clutching his leg, screaming curses in a language she didn't bother identifying. The other sprayed rounds blindly, chewing through plastic curtains and bed frames. Ava waited. When he paused to reload, she ended it. 5. She took a breath, slower this time. Somewhere deep in her chest, an old part of her woke up fully. The part that counted angles instead of heartbeats. The part that didn't ask permission. Downstairs, the Marine duty officer finally found his voice. All units fall back to triage and hold. Whoever's engaging is buying us time. Buying time. Ava almost smiled. The smugglers regrouped in the loading bay, snow blowing in through the half-open door. Their leader slammed a fist into a steel crate. This was supposed to be quiet, he snarled. We're losing men. Another shook his head, eyes wild. This isn't Marines. Someone else is here. He was right. They tried a new approach. Smoke. Thick, choking clouds poured into the hallways, fire alarms shrieking, sprinklers activated, turning floors slick, visibility worse, perfect cover. Ava dropped prone, crawling beneath the smoke layer, breath steady, eyes burning but focused. She popped up behind a smuggler who was coughing, mask pulled loose. 1 strike. Silent. 6. She dragged his body into a supply alcove and stripped the ammo without hesitation. Her radio crackled for the first time, not Marine frequency. Ghost, a voice said, distorted by interference. We know you're there. Ava froze. That word hadn't been spoken aloud in years. She clicked the radio off and moved again before the voice could continue. On the roof, a smuggler slipped on ice and fell hard, cracking ribs against the edge. Ava took him before he could cry out. 7. Inside, Marines began to realize the pattern. Every time the smugglers advanced, someone dropped. Clean. Fast. No wasted motion. A young Marine whispered, awe creeping into his fear. Sir, whoever that is, they're not missing. The duty officer swallowed. No, they're not. The smugglers made their last mistake when they split up. 2 pushed toward the generator room, thinking to kill the lights permanently. 3 went for triage, desperate, angry, reckless. Ava chose triage. She came down the stairwell behind them, steps silent, water dripping from her sleeves. One smuggler turned too late, eyes widening as he registered her stance, not medical, not civilian. He didn't get a shot off. 8. The last 2 tried to retreat. She didn't let them. 9. Silence crashed into the building, heavy and unreal, broken only by alarms and distant wind. Ava stood still, chest rising and falling, counting. 9 neutralized inside, 3 outside earlier, 12. That number followed her like a shadow. She holstered her weapon and stepped back into the light. A Marine nearly shot her. Jesus! He lowered his rifle, staring at her, soaked scrubs, calm eyes. Who are you? Before she could answer, the sound of rotors cut through the storm. A helicopter descended toward the landing pad, snow spiraling violently. The Marine commander stepped off before the skids fully touched down, coat whipping, face set in stone. He took in the scene in seconds. The bodies, the damage, the Marines staring at one woman like she'd stepped out of a legend. His gaze locked on Ava. She met it evenly. He nodded once. Stand down, he ordered the room. Then, louder, so everyone could hear. You're alive because of her. A murmur rippled through the Marines. Someone finally asked the question hanging in the air. Sir, she's a nurse? The commander didn't smile. She's not here as a nurse, he said. She's here so you don't die when things go wrong. Ava looked away. She hated that part. As medics moved in to treat the wounded and Marines secured the last entry points, the commander stepped closer, lowering his voice. You did what you had to, he said quietly. She nodded. They won't come back. How do you know? Because they learned. Outside, the storm began to ease, just slightly. Ava leaned against the wall, adrenaline finally draining, hands trembling now that no one was watching. She closed her eyes for a brief second and saw other corridors, Other snowless nights, other numbers she'd never forget. When she opened them again, a young Marine was standing in front of her, helmet under his arm. "Ma'am," he said hesitant, I thought nurses were supposed to save lives." She met his gaze, voice gentle but unyielding. "So did I." By morning, the hospital smelled like disinfectant and burnt wiring. Snow still pressed against the windows, but inside, everything felt exposed. Lights too bright, voices too quiet, every step echoing like the building itself was listening. Marines secured hallways with fresh rotations, boots squeaking on wet tile. The smugglers' bodies were gone. A zipped and moved before sunrise, leaving only bullet scars and blood-darkened grout to prove anything had happened at all. Ava washed her hands for a long time, not because they were dirty, because they were shaking. She stood alone at the sink, sleeves rolled, pale blue scrubs damp at the cuffs, staring at the steady stream of water as if it could rinse years off her skin. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw muzzle flashes where IV stands should be, heard wind where there should have been heart monitors, counted again without meaning to. 12. She pressed her palms flat on the counter and breathed until the numbers faded. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. Ava didn't turn. She knew who it was by the weight of the silence he carried. The Marine commander stepped into view beside her reflection. No helmet now, no coat. Just a man who'd spent the night watching young soldiers almost die and a woman make sure they didn't. "You should be resting," he said. "So should your men." He didn't argue. Outside the trauma wing, a cluster of Marines sat on the floor, backs against the wall, helmets in their laps. One had his arm wrapped. Another stared at nothing, jaw locked tight. When Ava passed them, conversation stopped. Not out of fear, out of something closer to reverence and confusion. A corporal finally broke it. "Ma'am," she paused. Were you always a nurse?" Ava met his eyes. She didn't lie. She just didn't tell him everything. "No," she said. "I learned medicine somewhere else first." He nodded like that answered more than it should have. In the command room, the commander laid out maps on a folding table. Red marks showed the smugglers' approach routes. Blue showed where Ava had moved. Every Marine in the room noticed the same thing. Her paths weren't random. They were anticipatory. "You predicted their split," the commander said, tapping the map. "You knew when they'd panic, when they'd push too hard." Ava leaned against the wall, arms folded loosely. "They weren't here for supplies." "No," he agreed. "They were here for leverage." He looked at her, really looked this time. "And you knew that before the first shot." She didn't answer right away. Another Marine, older, voice rough from smoke, spoke up. "Smugglers don't move like that unless they've trained against military units." "They did," Ava said, "just not yours." The room went still. "Who then?" someone asked. Ava's gaze drifted to the window, ones where snow blew sideways across the landing pad. "People who learn by losing," she said quietly. "Same as me." That earned silence, the heavy kind. Hours later, when the hospital finally settled into something resembling routine, Ava found herself back on the night ward. Same beds, same machines, different air. She checked a monitor, adjusted a drip, spoke softly to a Marine with a cracked rib who flinched every time the door opened. "You're safe," she told him. He nodded but didn't quite believe it. Ava knew the feeling. A young nurse, fresh, nervous, eyes too bright, hovered near the desk, clearly working up courage. They're saying things about you," she blurted. Ava raised an eyebrow. "Good things," the nurse rushed on. "Scary things. They think you're some kind of—" "Please don't finish that sentence," Ava said gently, and the nurse flushed. "I just wanted to say thank you." Ava smiled, small and tired. "You don't thank people for doing their job." The nurse hesitated. "Was that your job?" Ava didn't answer. She signed a chart and moved on. By late afternoon, word had spread beyond the hospital. Not names, not details. Just a story. Armed men, a storm. Marines alive who shouldn't be. Someone had already tried to take photos before being shut down hard. The commander found Ava in the supply room, restocking gauze like nothing unusual had happened. "There will be questions," he said. "From above." "I know. You don't have to stay." She tied off a box and slid it into place. "Neither do you." A corner of his mouth twitched. "Fair." He hesitated, then said, "Your record, what little of it exists, suggests a different path than this." Ava met his eyes. People change paths when the old one costs too much. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Ava lay on the narrow cot in the on-call room, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny cracks she'd memorized weeks ago. Her body ached now that the adrenaline was gone. Old injuries sang quietly under her skin. When she finally drifted, it wasn't into rest, but memory. Sand instead of snow. Heat instead of cold. A younger version of herself lying prone, breath controlled, rifle steady, a voice in her ear counting down. A target stepping into the open, a choice made in less than a second. She woke with a gasp, heart racing, the echo of a shot that had happened years ago still ringing in her ears. The next morning, the commander handed her a mug of coffee. "Transport's coming," he said, "for the smugglers we captured." "And for reports?" Ava wrapped her hands around the mug. "I won't be on it." "I know." He studied her face. "You could have been somewhere else. Warmer, safer." She took a sip. "This place needed me." "For how long?" he asked. She didn't answer. Outside, Marines formed up as a convoy arrived, tires crunching on packed snow. The commander stepped away to brief them, leaving Ava alone by the window again. A young Marine, the same corporal from before, approached quietly. "Ma'am?" "Yes?" He swallowed. "When they came in, when everything went bad, I froze. I thought that meant I wasn't cut out for this." Ava turned fully toward him. "Freezing doesn't mean failure." He frowned. "It doesn't?" "No," she said. "It means you're human. What matters is what you do next." He nodded slowly, like she'd handed him something solid to stand on. As the convoy pulled away, the hospital returned to its usual rhythm. Machines beeping, snow falling, leaves quietly continuing. Ava signed off her shift, hung her stethoscope, and walked the long hall toward the exit. The commander waited there. "You weren't here as a nurse," he said again, softer this time. "You were here as a shield." Ava stopped beside him. "Shields crack," she said, "and when they do, someone has to patch them up." He watched her go, boots echoing, scrubs disappearing around the corner. He didn't stop her, but as the doors closed behind her and the wind rushed in, Ava felt it, that familiar pull in her chest, the sense that what happened here wasn't finished with her yet, because somewhere beyond the snow and silence, people had noticed, and the past she thought she'd outrun was already finding its way back. By the time the sun came up for the second day, the base felt like a place holding its breath. The storm had moved on, but the cold stayed sharp enough to cut through gloves. Snowbanks along the perimeter were marked with boot prints and tire tracks that hadn't been there 48 hours ago. Generators hummed steadily now, almost too calmly, like they were trying to pretend the night before hadn't happened. Ava stood outside the hospital entrance, collar pulled up, watching Marines rotate guard duty. New faces, tired eyes. The kind of exhaustion that came from realizing you were alive by inches. She should have left already. That was the plan. Slip out quietly. Another shift covered. Another place survived. Another chapter closed before it could dig in too deep. Instead, she was still there. A pair of Marines passed her and fell silent mid-conversation. One nodded at her without smiling. The other hesitated, then straightened just a little more than necessary. Not a salute. Not quite. Something in between. Ava pretended not to notice. Inside, the hospital was calmer but not healed. Broken glass had been swept away, walls patched, blood scrubbed until it was just a memory in the grout. But the people moved differently now, heads turning faster, voices lower, senses tuned sharp. She made her rounds like any other morning. Vitals, bandages, quiet reassurances. When she reached the room where the youngest Marine had been brought in, the one who'd frozen at the first shots, she found him sitting upright, boots on the floor, staring at his hands. "You're up early," Ava said. He looked up fast. "Didn't sleep." "Most people don't, worrying after." He nodded. "Commander said you were shipping out." She adjusted the IV rate. "He talks too much." The Marine hesitated. "They're saying you weren't supposed to be here." Ava met his eyes. "I was exactly where I needed to be." That seemed to settle something in him. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been waiting to hear that. In the command office, the Marine commander studied a folder that looked thinner than it should have been. Half the pages were redacted. The rest read like summaries written by people who didn't want to know the details. Ava stood across from him, hands loose at her sides. "They'll ask why you were placed here," he said. "They always do. They'll ask how you knew the smuggler's timing, their fallback routes, their mistakes." She shrugged. "Experience teaches patterns. And when they ask about your past," Ava's jaw tightened just enough to notice. "Tell them I'm a nurse who doesn't panic." He looked at her for a long moment. "That won't satisfy them." "It never does." A radio crackled on his desk. A voice reported in, "Movement at the outer perimeter. Friendly, accounted for." The commander acknowledged it, then leaned back. "You saved 12 Marines last night?" he said. "Directly. Indirectly? More." Ava didn't respond. "You also killed 4 men." Her eyes flicked up. He held her gaze, not accusing, not absolving, just stating a fact. "Smugglers," he continued, "armed, trained, dangerous, but still men." Ava's voice was quiet. "I don't count kills anymore." The commander nodded. "I thought you might say that." Outside, a transport helicopter thundered overhead, a snow swirling under its rotors. Ava felt the vibration in her bones before the sound faded into distance. That afternoon, word came down that higher command was sending a delegation, not investigators, officially, but observers. People who asked polite questions and wrote careful notes. Ava didn't wait to meet them. She changed out of her scrubs, folded them neatly, and placed them on the bunk. The light blue fabric looked almost out of place in the austere room, like proof that this version of her existed at all. As she stepped into the hall, the young nurse she'd worked with the night before rushed up. "They're looking for you," the nurse whispered. "Men in uniforms I don't recognize." Ava smiled faintly. "They always are." "Are you in trouble?" Ava considered the question. "Not the kind that ends with handcuffs." The nurse swallowed. You're not coming back, are you?" Ava paused. "Places like this don't keep people like me for long." The nurse's eyes shone with something like disappointment. "I wish I was like you." Ava shook her head gently. "No, you don't. Be better. Be kinder. Be rested." She walked away before the nurse could respond. At the exit, the commander waited again. Parka zipped, breath fogging the air. "They've landed," he said. 10 minutes, maybe less." Ava nodded. "That's generous." He handed her a folded piece of paper. "Medical transfer order. Temporary. No destination listed." She raised an eyebrow. "That's sloppy." "It's intentional," he said. "If anyone asks, you were reassigned before the incident concluded. And if they ask again," he met her gaze, "I'll tell them the truth, that you were here for our protection." Again, not the other way around. Ava studied him. "That story will cost you." He shrugged. "Commanders are paid in consequences." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind carried the distant whine of engines warming on the pad. Finally, Ava said, "You kept your men alive." He shook his head. "You did." "No," she corrected softly. "I just made room for them to survive." Footsteps echoed behind them. A few Marines had gathered at the far end of the hall, not in formation, not officially, just standing, watching. One stepped forward, then another. They didn't speak. They didn't salute. They simply nodded. Ava felt something tighten in her chest, unexpected and unwelcome. She turned before it could settle. Outside, the cold hit hard. Snow squeaked under her boots as she crossed toward the unmarked vehicle waiting beyond the lights. The driver didn't ask her name. He didn't need to. As the engine started, Ava looked back once. The hospital stood solid against the white, lights glowing warm against the dark. Marines moved along the perimeter, alert, alive. For the first time in a long while, she let herself believe she'd left something better behind. The vehicle rolled forward. Miles later, as the base disappeared into snow and distance, Ava leaned her head against the window. The reflection staring back at her looked older than her years, calmer and more tired than she felt. She thought about the night, the first shot, the last one, the spaces in between where everything could have gone wrong and didn't. She thought about the kills she no longer counted, the lives she still did. She thought about the nurse she'd been pretending to be, and the soldier she never really stopped being. Somewhere ahead, another place would need her. Another quiet corner of the world where danger would arrive wearing a different face. She would show up in scrubs again or not. It didn't matter. What mattered was the moment between fear and action. That was where she lived now. If this story stayed with you, if you believe that the quiet people in the room often carry the heaviest weight, then stay with us. Subscribe, not because we ask, but because these stories only survive when someone chooses to listen.